Hey guys, tonight we drift back to a time when the air smells like salt, sweat, and unknown flowers, and the horizon shimmers with the promise of adventure. Or maybe mild chaos. You trudge down the wooden gangway, your boots sinking slightly in sand so soft it feels like walking on powdered sugar. You probably won't survive this story if you imagine it purely as a romantic idyll. There's a lot of awkward staring, misfired intentions, and, yes, some eyebrow-raising cultural exchanges that historians still argue whether we can even fully understand. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead, pause if you need to. Post your location and local time while you're at it. I'm curious if anyone else is reading this at, say, 2 a.m. or in broad daylight. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand on the deck of a British vessel that has sailed farther than your own imagination usually allows. The tropical sun hits your neck like a mild slap, and the smell of the ocean, strong and briny, clings to your hair. The crew murmurs among themselves, half in anticipation, half in exhaustion. You notice Captain Cook leaning on the railing, squinting at the hazy line where sky and water meet. Somewhere in your subconscious, you know that stepping off this ship will change everything. And not just for you, but for everyone here, and everyone there, on the islands waiting silently, palm fronds rustling, as if whispering secrets about what is to come. When the first rowboats touch the white sand, your feet sink slightly into the warm grains. Tahitian women emerge from the foliage, their movements fluid, almost like the palms swaying in the breeze. Their eyes are curious, their laughter melodic. You notice small gifts carried in the folds of their clothing shells, feathers, and a few simple cloths. You're not sure yet if this is a greeting, a test, or a trap. Sailors start to step onto the beach, nails clinking in pockets, knives tucked at their belts, and suddenly you see the absurdity of the situation. A piece of iron, a nail, might be more valuable here than a gold coin back home. Historians still argue whether the importance of these nails was purely practical, or if they held a symbolic, almost magical weight for the locals. The first exchanges are awkward. You extend a rusty spike toward a woman who tilts her head, studies it, and hands you a woven bracelet. Her smile is patient, teasing, and for a moment you think you've mastered diplomacy. Then a sailor next to you fumbles with a hammer, dropping it, and the resulting clatter sends a flock of seabirds into the sky in a blur of white and grey. You laugh nervously. They do not. But you notice that the women's eyes flick to the horizon, where the forest edges meet the beach. They are calculating, observing. And you realize how little you know about the territory you've just set foot on. Some scholars suggest the Tahitians were as intrigued by your strangeness as you are by theirs. Others think they saw the British merely as a source of shiny objects, with humour and curiosity layered over commerce. Walking along the shoreline, your feet leaving shallow impressions that the tide quickly swallows. You encounter a small group of children playing near the water. One of them has found a loose nail and is studying it like it's a tiny, magical sword. You hand over another nail, and their eyes light up. There's a palpable sense of ceremony in these little trades, a rhythm of give and take that feels older than anything you've learned in maps or history books. You notice how some of the men glance nervously at Captain Cook, as if seeking approval, while others ignore him completely, caught up in the strange exhilaration of this first contact. A fringe theory even posits that these nail exchanges were part of an ancient Tahitian ritual of testing outsiders, though mainstream historians remain skeptical. The first night falls quickly. You sit near a fire, feeling the sticky warmth of the sand beneath you, watching the stars blink awake. Lanterns on the ship bob gently with the waves, and in the distance, you hear the murmur of voices speaking in languages you don't understand. One of the sailors mutters a rumor about a woman who can see the future in the tide pools. And while you suppress a laugh, a strange part of you wonders if there might be truth hidden in jest. The air smells of roasted fish, coconut, and the faint tang of iron from your pocketful of nails. Your eyelids grow heavy, but your mind refuses to rest, replaying the day's first steps on Tahitian soil. Historians still argue whether these first nights shaped enduring alliances, or merely planted seeds of future misunderstandings. The beach is alive with nocturnal sound, the rustle of leaves, the soft lap of waves, and the occasional distant shout from sailors still adjusting to life in paradise. You lie back, staring up at constellations unfamiliar yet strangely comforting. Somewhere nearby, a Tahitian drum keeps time, steady and insistent, reminding you that rhythm belongs not to one people alone. You notice your own heartbeat, loud in the quiet, synchronized, in a way, with the universe around you. You wonder if you're seeing history or simply imagining it, the two blending as easily as foam and water. In this first night, the world feels vast, incomprehensible, and intoxicatingly immediate. By dawn you awaken to the smell of salt water and roasting taro. Sailors are already bustling, trading whispers about the previous days, successes, and failures. One man boasts about receiving a bracelet, 2 nails, and a shy smile. Another complains bitterly that a local child swiped his hammer. You realize that every small incident carries weight, not just materially, but socially. You observe the intricate dance of curiosity, calculation, and charm that begins to define your interactions. A Tahitian elder approaches quietly, examining the nails you carry, nodding once and walking away. You feel a thrill of recognition, even without words. These gestures are heavy with meaning. Fringe accounts suggest some women orchestrated exchanges to test the resolve and wit of visitors, turning what seemed like casual trade into subtle negotiation games. As the morning stretches, you walk along the shore again, noticing tiny crabs darting sideways in perfect synchrony. Sailors are learning, slowly, that each nail given carries potential consequences. Friendship, misunderstanding, gossip. You spot Captain Cook giving discreet signals, trying to balance curiosity with caution. You begin to understand why these first contacts are so famous, and so debated. What seems whimsical or trivial can ripple into diplomacy, trade, or even conflict. A light breeze carries coconut husks across the sand. You step over one and laugh quietly at the absurdity of being simultaneously terrified, awed, and entirely human. By mid-morning, you're aware of an unspoken rhythm. Nails vanish from pockets with surprising speed. Smiles are exchanged as easily as bows, and the line between gift and favor blurs. Historians still argue whether these interactions reflected Tahitian agency or British naivety, but you feel it more immediately in your stomach, a fluttering mixture of excitement and nervousness. You crouch to examine a nail embedded in sand, half buried, wondering if you should retrieve it or leave it as an offering to the tide. It seems the simplest objects, the smallest shards of iron, carry worlds of possibility. By noon the sun is high, and the crew rests under palms. You notice a peculiar phenomenon. Some of the women, when handed nails, glance skyward, muttering under their breath. You don't understand the words, but the gesture feels deliberate. One sailor jokes that they're summoning a storm, and everyone laughs, though a thin tension lingers. You remember the stories of Polynesian navigation, of knowledge written in stars, currents, and clouds, and feel a shiver of respect for the complexity you are only beginning to glimpse. This, too, will feed debates for centuries, the meaning of small gestures, the subtlety of early contact, the interplay of curiosity, desire, and diplomacy. By mid-afternoon, you trudge back along the beach, tired but alert, marveling at the contrast between the soft, warm sand and the sharp, cold metal in your pocket. A bird caws overhead, startling a sailor who jumps, dropping a nail into the tide. The moment is ridiculous, yet entirely human. You feel the absurdity of history pressing in, that something so tiny, so mundane, can alter perceptions, relationships, and eventually, written records for generations. You glance at the horizon, knowing the islands hold mysteries far beyond your comprehension. And you also feel, for the first time, the weight of being a witness to them. As the day wanes, you sit on a driftwood log, watching shadows lengthen, and the first flickers of firelight appear along the shore. Tahitian women move gracefully through their villages, unseen yet present, orchestrating exchanges and conversations beyond your ears. Sailors recount tales, each more exaggerated than the last, and you laugh softly, understanding that every memory is already beginning to warp under human storytelling. In these first hours, history is living, breathing, messy, and you are right in the middle of it, learning that paradise is complicated, nail by nail, smile by smile. Night falls again, cooler now, the air thick with the scent of flowers and salt. You lie on the sand, looking at the sky now spilling with stars, feeling the vastness of the universe press gently against you. Somewhere, a Tahitian drum continues its slow pulse, as steady as your own heartbeat. You close your eyes briefly, letting the warmth of sand and the subtle rhythm of the island lull you, realizing that this first arrival, this seemingly simple landing on the shore, is the opening note of a symphony that will play out in complexity, curiosity, and human ambition for years to come. The small, gleaming nails in your pocket feel heavier now, carriers not just of utility, but of connection, misunderstanding, and history in the making. You trudge along the beach at first light, sand sticking between your toes, as if determined to remind you that you are no longer in London or Portsmouth, or anywhere familiar. The horizon glows faint pink, and the ocean murmurs softly against the shore, carrying with it the sense of salt, coral, and something floral that's unmistakably Tahitian. You notice the women moving through the palm groves, their movements fluid and unhurried, like they've been performing the same choreography for centuries. Sailors poke their heads over the sand dunes, squinting in the new sun, and you realize how little anyone here actually understands each other yet. Every glance, every gesture, every simple smile is loaded with meaning that you're only beginning to decode. Historians still argue whether these first encounters were more transactional or social, but right now, in the morning haze, it doesn't matter. The air itself vibrates with curiosity and possibility. You watch as some of the Tahitian women approach the landing boats, carrying baskets filled with fruit leaves and the occasional shell ornament. One of the sailors holds a rusty nail in his palm, glancing nervously at Captain Cook, who is surveying the scene with a mixture of fascination and anxiety. The exchange begins tentatively, a nail for a small woven mat, another for a coconut shell cup. You can feel the subtle tension in every interaction, the unspoken negotiation embedded in each tiny handoff. There's humor too. One young sailor tries to trade a spoon, only for the woman to raise an eyebrow and shake her head, amused. Fringe accounts suggest she might have been teaching him a lesson about value and desire, but you simply chuckle, grateful for the lesson in humility. Walking closer, you notice how the locals move together with a rhythm that feels almost ritualistic. Children dart in and out, sometimes taking shiny objects, sometimes pretending to ignore them entirely. One child examines a nail with such intensity it seems like he's trying to decipher some ancient code, while a Tahitian woman beside him hums a soft tune, swaying in perfect time with the gentle waves. You realize the subtle artistry of observation at play, the way they read your reactions, your hesitations, even your laughter. Historians still argue whether these early interactions were primarily games of diplomacy, education, or mutual curiosity. A sailor taps you on the shoulder, whispering conspiratorially about the miraculous way the locals seem to predict which nails would vanish quickest. You glance down at your pocket and find the same nail you intended to trade has mysteriously disappeared. The child who held it grins, mischievous and knowing, and you can't help but laugh. There's an absurdity here that makes you forget the seriousness of exploration for a moment. The fact that history is unfolding in real time, in gestures small enough to fit in a hand, yet profound enough to ripple across continents. You glance at Captain Cook, who is scribbling notes feverishly, his brow furrowed, and you realize the meticulousness of his record. Keeping will shape centuries of historical interpretation. By mid-morning, the air is warmer, and the exchanges become more confident. The Tahitian women offer fruit, cloth, and occasional small trinkets. The sailors hand over nails, pins, and bits of metal, each transaction carrying layers of meaning. You notice that some of the locals whisper among themselves before accepting gifts, sometimes stepping back, sometimes leaning in, evaluating. It is almost like watching a silent conversation conducted in gestures and glances. You remember the earlier remark about nails holding symbolic weight, and now you understand. Every object here is amplified by context, carrying stories, status, and strategy. Fringe interpretations suggest that the Tahitians might have used these first trades to assess the newcomer's intelligence and patience, a hypothesis that makes you smirk because you feel entirely tested without even realizing it. The heat presses down, and you retreat to the shade of a coconut grove, watching sailors and locals mingle under the dappled sunlight. One sailor is attempting to make sense of the language barrier, pointing at objects and murmuring approximations of Tahitian words. The women respond with laughter and subtle corrections, correcting tone, inflection, or gesture. You lean against a palm trunk, letting the leaves rustle above you, and realize that these first hours are forming the rules of engagement. Not codified in writing yet, but understood through action. Historians still argue whether the early British misunderstood Tahitian social hierarchies or simply underestimated the nuance in these exchanges. You wander back to the beach and notice the peculiar phenomenon of synchronized observation. Women stand just beyond the edges of the immediate trading circle, watching intently, whispering, gesturing. They are gathering information, assessing the character of each sailor. You see the same calculation mirrored in the crew, who are counting, comparing, and recording every successful trade. There's a quiet tension, a balance of power mediated not by armies, but by perception, charm, and attentiveness. You realize that what looks like simple bartering is actually the opening stanza of a complex, ongoing negotiation. At noon, the sun hangs high, and the warmth draws beads of sweat down your neck. You notice a group of sailors boasting about conquests, of trade, exaggerating stories of who received what and from whom. The laughter rings out, and yet there's a layer of seriousness underneath. These objects are the currency of influence here, small tools of social negotiation with consequences that might extend far beyond the shore. You watch a young Tahitian woman pocket a nail while pretending to examine a shell, and you understand that cunning and wit are as valuable as the iron itself. Historians still debate whether these actions were playful subterfuge or deliberate exercises in long-term strategy. By mid-afternoon, you follow a trail of footprints deeper into the sand, noticing how each step seems to mark a dialogue. One sailor leaves a nail behind by mistake, and a local boy picks it up, examining it before running toward the trees. You watch, fascinated, as the object passes from hand to hand, almost like a baton in an invisible relay. The idea of ownership here feels fluid, shaped by attention, intention, and negotiation rather than formal claim. Fringe interpretations suggest that these playful exchanges were ways of teaching newcomers the importance of observation, patience, and respect. You can't help but chuckle. Centuries later, historians are still unraveling the implications of what you are seeing firsthand. The sun begins its slow descent, and the golden light casts long shadows over the sand. You notice the rhythm of human and natural life waves lap gently. Palm fronds sway, and the exchanges continue with a mesmerizing cadence. You step back and realize you're a spectator and a participant simultaneously, absorbed in the intricate social choreography of the shore. Each glance, laugh, and nod carries multiple layers of meaning. You understand that history isn't just written in journals. It is felt in subtle gestures, in small transactions, in the quiet understanding that unfolds when two cultures meet for the first time. As twilight approaches, you feel the day's heat fading into the softer hues of evening. Sailors and locals alike pause, resting on logs, leaning against palms, or sitting cross-legged in the sand. You notice that these pauses are moments of reflection, learning, and silent assessment. The first glimmers of mutual understanding are visible now, like faint constellations forming in a previously dark sky. You realize that the encounters you have witnessed today are shaping relationships that will endure in stories, objects, and memory. The air smells of salt, smoke, and the subtle tang of metal, and you breathe it in, savoring the complexity of being present at the very beginning of this unusual exchange. Night falls with a slow, deliberate grace, and you feel the rhythm of the island settling into a nocturnal cadence. Waves lap the shore, cicadas chirp, and the fires flicker with golden light. You lie back for a moment, letting the day's observations wash over you, nails as currency, laughter as diplomacy, gestures as negotiation. The world is vast, strange, and intoxicatingly alive. Historians still argue whether these first hours determined long-term patterns or merely introduced fleeting impressions. But to you, watching the twilight deepen, it all feels immediate, vivid, and utterly unforgettable. You trudge barefoot along the shifting sands, noticing how each step sinks slightly, reminding you with every grain that you are neither master nor visitor here, merely a participant in a world older than your maps. The morning sun glints off the surf, dazzling your eyes, and you squint, blinking against its intensity. Somewhere nearby, a Tahitian woman tilts her head, watching you with calm curiosity, while a sailor fumbles with a nail, trying to gauge its value in a place where even iron seems precious. You notice how quickly these small, mundane objects, rusty nails, bits of metal, fragments of broken tools, become tokens of fascination, desire, and subtle negotiation. Historians still argue whether the British overestimated their leverage, or the Tahitians were subtly orchestrating the early dynamics to their advantage. You wander closer to the landing area where groups of women and children have gathered. Some carry coconuts, others weave mats with practiced hands, and a few hold out fingers to count nails or pins. The sailors, equally curious and anxious, begin handing over their metal trinkets, marveling at the ease with which these objects seem to gain meaning. You notice the absurdity back in England. A nail is nothing more than a connector of wood, a simple tool. Here, it is practically magic, a ticket to interaction, favor, or perhaps simply a smile. Fringe accounts suggest that nails were seen as conduits of energy or power, a symbolic medium connecting distant cultures. You chuckle to yourself. Magic, energy, or not, these little spikes are running the show. As you watch, a young sailor proudly presents a nail to a woman, who inspects it with meticulous care. She weighs it in her palm, turns it over, and finally offers a small shell ornament in exchange. The sailor beams, thinking he has made a triumphant trade, but you notice the subtle glances exchanged between the woman and a child nearby. It is almost as if they are sharing a private joke, invisible to the British eye. The negotiation is layered practical exchange, social teaching, and performance all rolled into a single moment. Historians still argue whether such early trades were intentional social instruction or simply a byproduct of curiosity. You move along the shoreline, noticing the ebb and flow of human interaction mirrored in the tide itself. Sailors boast quietly to each other about their successes, sometimes exaggerating, sometimes simply misunderstanding. One man waves a nail around, recounting how he convinced a woman to take it, while the woman in question laughs softly, passing it along to a younger girl, before disappearing into the brush. You feel a twinge of amusement and recognition. The real exchange is not the nail itself, but the subtle choreography of attention, observation, and reaction. This is diplomacy in its rawest, most human form. You pause to examine a small nail lying half buried in the sand. Picking it up, you notice faint rust patterns, the tiny imperfections marking it as singular, unique, just like the interactions it will participate in. A Tahitian boy spots you and giggles, reaching for the nail. You hand it over, and his face lights up with satisfaction. You realize that these seemingly insignificant objects carry outsized influence of trust, favor, and curiosity. Fringe interpretations suggest that Tahitians may have used nails to test the temperament and patience of the newcomers, observing reactions closely to determine character. You laugh quietly, realizing that centuries of historians will later debate what you are witnessing with absolute seriousness. Walking further along the beach, you overhear conversations among the crew, some skeptical, some enthusiastic. One sailor mutters that the women only care about shiny metal, while another counters, pointing to the careful, deliberate way items are examined and exchanged. You notice a Tahitian elder observing quietly from the shade of a pandanus tree, seemingly indifferent, but absorbing every gesture. You start to appreciate the complexity. This is not simple barter. This is a web of perception, hierarchy, and cultural nuance, woven together with the lightest touch of humor and human curiosity. Midday approaches, and the sun climbs high, casting stark shadows over the sand. Sailors and locals alike are engaged in what looks like chaos, but on closer inspection is a delicate, intricate dance. Nails pass from hand to hand, shells are swapped for cloth, and laughter ripples through the exchanges. You notice the rhythm observation, offering, weighing, acceptance, and finally, movement to the next participant. There is a quiet intelligence embedded in the process, a subtle teaching of patience, attention, and respect. Historians still debate whether the British fully grasped the sophistication of these interactions or merely interpreted them through the lens of their own assumptions. You take a moment to examine the landscape. White sands giving way to thick foliage, palm fronds swaying with a whispering rustle, the surf rolling in predictable patterns. The natural world seems to mirror the human exchanges, predictable in rhythm, yet endlessly variable in detail. One sailor drops a nail and it rolls toward the water, only to be intercepted by a laughing child. The absurdity of the moment strikes you. The power of a small object, the playfulness of observation, the quiet negotiation happening in real time. Fringe accounts suggest that even these accidental events were meaningful, interpreted by locals as signs of character or luck. By afternoon, you are noticing patterns in behavior. Sailors adjust their approach, learning which gestures please, which amuse, and which bewilder. Tahitian women respond with precision, subtly guiding interactions while maintaining agency. You realize that the earlier perception of the nails as simple tools was naive. They are keys to understanding, teaching, and manipulating social dynamics. You watch a sailor try to trade a nail for a piece of fruit, only to be gently corrected, and you appreciate the quiet elegance of the lesson. Historians still argue whether such interactions constituted early diplomacy, social testing, or just playful curiosity. But here, On the sand, you see all three intertwined. As the sun begins to lower, casting long golden streaks across the beach, you notice how light affects perception. Shadows stretch and warp, and gestures take on new weight in the soft evening glow. A small group of women gather, whispering and pointing toward the sailors, orchestrating subtle adjustments in behavior. You realize that observation is as critical as action. Every glance, every tilt of the head, every hesitation carries information. Fringe interpretations even suggest that these early exchanges were sometimes premeditated games designed to test European patience, cleverness, or honesty. You smile quietly, impressed by the sophistication hidden beneath apparent simplicity. The tide is beginning to rise, and you step back, allowing the waves to lap at your ankles. Sailors continue trading, laughing, and sometimes fumbling, while Tahitian children dart in and out, absorbing the rhythm of the day. You reflect on the sheer absurdity and profundity of this moment, that small nails, tiny and inconsequential in England, hold such significance here, mediating first contact, curiosity, and subtle power dynamics. You feel a shiver of awareness. This is history, unfolding quietly, intimately, under the sun and stars alike. By twilight, the exchanges wind down. You sit near the fire, sand sticking to your damp skin, and watch the rhythmic pulse of island life continue around you. One sailor recounts his adventures with exaggerated pride, while a Tahitian woman nearby observes silently, nodding subtly to a younger girl. You notice the layers play, observation, negotiation, and teaching all folded into one ongoing moment. Historians still argue whether these early moments had long-term consequences or were simply ephemeral curiosities. But you, standing on this beach, feel the immediacy of every glance, laugh, and gesture. Night falls, bringing a soft hush across the sand. Waves lap gently, and the palm trees sway with the evening breeze. You lie back briefly, letting your mind drift over the patterns of the day. The nails, the laughter, the careful observation, the subtle negotiation, every action, every reaction, every exchange of metal for fruit or shell carries weight far beyond its apparent value. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the rhythmic pulse of island life, human curiosity, and quiet diplomacy lull you into reflection. These first glimmers of contact are shaping relationships, stories, and memories that will endure long after the sun sets. You trudge along the warm, sunlit sands, noticing how the day's heat sticks to your skin like a damp cloth, while the surf laps gently at the shore, carrying with it the sense of salt, roasted coconut, and faint iron from the nails in your pocket. You watch sailors preparing for yet another round of exchanges. Holding rusty spikes and small metal pins like talismans, their expressions a mix of excitement and uncertainty. You can't help but marvel at the absurdity of it back home. Nails are nothing more than tools, forgotten in a carpenter's box. Here, they have become keys to connection, favor, and perhaps even flirtation. Historians still argue whether these early trades were purely transactional, or if they carried deeper social meanings embedded in Tahitian culture. You approach a small group of women who have gathered near the edge of the forest, each carrying baskets of fruit, woven mats, or shell ornaments. Their movements are precise, practiced, yet infused with grace and attention. One woman tilts her head, studying a nail offered by a sailor, before sliding it into a small pouch and handing him a carved coconut in return. The sailor beams, thinking he has triumphed in negotiation, but you notice a subtle, almost conspiratorial glance between her and a nearby child. It's a small gesture, easily missed, but loaded with intent, an elegant lesson in observation and patience. Fringe accounts suggest these exchanges sometimes served as subtle tests of character, gauging patience, honesty, and cleverness. You wander further down the shore, noting how the children dart between adults, their laughter mingling with the gentle crash of waves. One child picks up a nail dropped by a careless sailor and examines it like a miniature treasure. You hand him another from your pocket, and his eyes light up with delight. The simplicity of the moment belies the complex social choreography taking place, the giving, the receiving, the subtle negotiation of trust and favor. You realize, with a quiet thrill, that even the smallest gestures carry weight, shaping relationships in ways that will ripple far beyond this sunny beach. Historians still debate the degree to which Tahitian agency influenced these early interactions versus British interpretation. As the sun climbs higher, the rhythm of trade accelerates. Sailors offer nails, pins, and bits of metal. Tahitian women respond with fruit, mats, and delicate shell ornaments. You watch carefully, noticing patterns, which gestures elicit smiles, which trades require negotiation, which actions are playful tests. A sailor hands over a rusty nail, only to have it returned with a playful tap on the shoulder, a gentle reminder that nothing here is straightforward. You laugh softly, appreciating the subtlety of it all. Fringe interpretations suggest that these playful exchanges were deliberately instructive, teaching newcomers about observation, patience, and cultural awareness without ever needing words. You step back, observing the ebb and flow of human interaction. One woman offers a nail to a sailor, who accepts it with exaggerated ceremony. Nearby, another woman adjusts a child's position, whispering and pointing to guide behavior. It's all conducted with an elegance that feels effortless. Yet you know it is the product of centuries of social knowledge and intuition. You start to notice how the British sailors, despite their confidence, are learning the rules of engagement in real time, often fumbling, sometimes amusing, always being observed. Historians still argue whether these exchanges were truly reciprocal, or if the locals maintained control over the flow of influence throughout. By mid-morning, the beach is alive with movement. Sailors boast quietly about successful trades, exaggerating stories of clever negotiation or unearned victories. One man waves a nail proudly, recounting how he won a mat, while a nearby woman laughs quietly, passing the object along to a child. You realize that the real exchange isn't just metal for material. It's a constant negotiation of perception, attention, and subtle power. The absurdity of it all is striking centuries later. These seemingly trivial moments will be scrutinized by historians, debated over interpretations of agency, influence, and cultural insight. The sun grows hotter, and the rhythm of exchanges becomes almost hypnotic. Nails vanish from pockets. Shells pass from hand to hand, and laughter punctuates each transaction. You notice a sailor accidentally dropping a nail, which a child immediately retrieves. Grinning, a Tahitian woman tilts her head, silently assessing the scene. Every move is observed, every action interpreted. The interplay of curiosity, humor, and subtle negotiation reminds you that what appears simple on the surface carries layers of complexity, cultural meaning, and strategic insight. Fringe accounts suggest that these playful actions were sometimes carefully orchestrated to gauge the newcomer's wit and patience. You pause to reflect as you walk along the edge of the surf, letting the tide wash over your feet. The landscape is stunning: white sands, turquoise waters, and the deep green of the forest beyond. Yet your attention keeps returning to the small objects that have become so vital. Nails, pins, shells, each one a tiny fulcrum of human connection. You watch as a sailor nervously offers a nail, receiving a careful, deliberate smile in return. You notice the layers of observation and subtle messaging: the nods, the tilts of the head, the way the eyes meet and part. Historians still debate whether the British recognized the sophistication of these exchanges or simply interpreted them as whimsical curiosities. By afternoon, patterns are clear. Sailors adjust their strategies, noticing which gestures succeed and which fail. Tahitian women guide, correct, and occasionally playfully tease, creating a delicate dance of influence. You see the importance of patience, attentiveness, and respect, the ability to observe and respond appropriately. Fringe interpretations suggest these interactions functioned as subtle lessons in social intelligence, teaching Europeans the norms of island life without needing language. You can't help but grin, realizing that, in centuries to come, scholars will pore over journals and logs to dissect moments you are witnessing firsthand. As the sun tilts toward the horizon, casting long golden shadows, you step back and appreciate the artistry of the exchanges. The beach is alive with movement, laughter, and observation. Nails, shells, fruit, and woven mats pass from hand to hand, each transaction layered with meaning. You realize that history is not only in the grand gestures, but in the small, seemingly mundane acts that carry weight far beyond their material value. The subtle choreography, the humor, the attention, it all creates a vivid tapestry of human connection, curiosity, and negotiation. Night descends softly. The surf hisses quietly at the shore. Palm fronds rustle, and a few fires flicker along the sand. Sailors and Tahitians alike pause, resting after a long day of exchanges, observation, and subtle lessons. You lie back briefly, letting the warmth of sand and evening air soothe your muscles. The patterns of the day, trades, gestures, glances, small tests of patience, play in your mind like a gentle refrain. Historians still argue about the implications of these first encounters, but you feel them intimately, embedded in laughter, attention, and the small, gleaming nails that have become the unexpected currency of paradise. You trudge along the shore as the morning sun casts a soft gold across the sand, feeling it warm underfoot, grain by grain. The tide whispers against the beach, a slow, rhythmic pulse that mirrors the subtle tension in the air between the British crew and the Tahitian locals. Today feels different, less like an initial greeting and more like a negotiation unfolding, one laden with misread signals and cultural assumptions. You notice the sailors adjusting their posture, glancing at one another for reassurance, nails and pins clutched like fragile keys to understanding. Historians still argue whether these early interactions were fundamentally transactional or whether they involved a more complex interplay of social signaling and observation. A small group of Tahitian women approaches, their movements fluid and confident, carrying woven mats and baskets of fruit. One woman tilts her head at a sailor holding a nail, her eyes narrowing, just enough to indicate appraisal. You notice subtle glances between her and the child at her side, an almost imperceptible communication that you realize is being continuously performed throughout these encounters. You hand over a nail, and she inspects it as though weighing its unseen weight. After a moment, she smiles faintly, handing you a small carved shell in exchange. The sailor beside you chuckles nervously, feeling like he has won, unaware of the subtle lesson about observation, patience, and local customs that just took place. Fringe accounts suggest these moments were deliberately orchestrated by locals to gauge European understanding of social nuance, though historians debate the intentionality behind them. You walk further along the sand, feeling the sun climbing higher and the heat sticking to your skin. Sailors argue quietly over who received what, which trade was the most valuable, which woman seemed impressed or amused. Laughter mingles with tension, the absurdity of interpreting human behavior across a cultural chasm, creating both humor and confusion. You notice a Tahitian elder observing the entire scene from the shade of a pandanus tree, her eyes sharp and unwavering. She seems to understand the rhythm of British mistakes, the sway of their egos, and the fragility of their assumptions. Her presence is calm but potent, a reminder that not all authority is written in logs or enforced by naval command. Historians still debate how much Tahitian agency influenced the outcomes of these first encounters versus British projections of control. As the morning stretches into mid-day, the exchanges intensify. Nails disappear from sailors' pockets with surprising speed. Shells and fruit circulate among hands, and each gesture carries layered meaning. You notice how one sailor attempts to present a nail with exaggerated ceremony, only to have it returned with a playful tap on the shoulder from a young woman. The lesson is subtle, yet unmistakable. Appearances and intentions matter, but awareness and humility are equally essential. Fringe theories even suggest that these exchanges functioned as impromptu social curricula, teaching newcomers the codes of local interaction without spoken instruction. You grin quietly, imagining centuries of scholars later attempting to decode moments you are seeing unfold naturally. You step aside for a moment, letting the ebb and flow of exchanges wash over you. Children dart between adults, occasionally pocketing a nail or shell and giggling, teaching the unobservant the importance of vigilance and subtlety. The sailors start to notice these patterns, some adjusting their methods, others fumbling, still trying to impose logic onto a system that doesn't operate on European rules. You realize the absurdity and delight of it all. The same object, a simple nail, can be a tool, a currency, a test, or a symbol, depending entirely on perception. Historians still argue about whether the British understood this sophistication or merely stumbled through it, recording observations that would later fuel myths and half-truths. Walking further, you catch sight of a sailor who has dropped a nail into the shallow surf. A Tahitian child retrieves it quickly, holding it up like a small trophy before passing it to a woman who smiles faintly and tucks it into her basket. You notice how smoothly the interactions flow, each participant aware of rules unspoken yet widely understood. There is humor here, subtle negotiation, and social instruction all at once. The simplicity of a nail becomes a lens through which culture, hierarchy, and personal skill are all communicated simultaneously. Fringe interpretations posit that such exchanges were used strategically to evaluate newcomers' temperaments, even as the British themselves remained largely unaware of being tested. By mid-afternoon, you begin to recognize recurring motifs. Sailors lean forward, offering nails with tentative confidence. Tahitian women receive, assess, and respond with careful precision. Small objects pass repeatedly, teaching patience, observation, and adaptability. You notice one sailor attempting to trade 2 nails at once, only to be corrected by a gentle gesture, a reminder that quantity does not replace tact. Historians still debate whether these early encounters established long-term social norms or simply reflected ephemeral curiosity and playful instruction. The sun casts longer shadows over the sand as afternoon wanes. You take a moment to observe the natural rhythm waves rise and fall. Coconuts sway in gentle arcs, and human interactions unfold like subtle choreography. A sailor drops a nail, another retrieves it, a woman smiles, a child whispers instructions. Layers upon layers of communication, almost invisible yet critically important. Fringe accounts suggest that these patterns were intentional, designed to teach cultural awareness and adaptability in a non-verbal, yet profoundly effective way. As evening approaches, the exchanges begin to wind down. Sailors recount their successes, with laughter and exaggeration, while Tahitian observers respond with quiet amusement, offering subtle corrections and guidance. You notice how quickly humor and observation merge into instruction, a complex social dance disguised as casual trade. Every interaction, however small, seems imbued with meaning, shaping perceptions, relationships, and memory. Historians still argue about the long-term impact of these initial moments, whether they fostered understanding or reinforced misinterpretations, but you feel it intimately in the rhythm, attention, and curiosity of every participant. Night falls softly, and the tide laps gently at the shore. Fires flicker across the sand, casting warm glows and long shadows. You lie back for a moment, feeling the day's observations settle like sediment in your mind. The lessons are quiet, but clear attention, patience, and subtle observation carry power. Even the smallest object, a nail, a shell, can mediate relationships, teach insight, and shape first impressions. Fringe interpretations suggest that these exchanges were foundational to the intricate social dynamics that would define future interactions. You close your eyes, letting the soft, rhythmic pulse of the ocean and the subtle energy of human exchange lull you into reflection, knowing that history is happening here, in small, fleeting gestures, just beyond the surf. You trudge along the shifting sand, your bare feet leaving fleeting impressions that the tide will swallow before anyone notices. The air is rich with the scent of salt, flowers, and sun-warmed earth, a complex perfume that seems to hold the island's secret history in its layers. You notice Tahitian women moving with deliberate grace through the palms, their gestures precise, yet infused with a casual elegance that makes every movement feel intentional. Some carry woven mats, others baskets of fruit, while a few simply observe the newcomers, eyes sharp and calculating. You begin to sense that what seems like casual curiosity is, in fact, a careful orchestration of presence and influence. Historians still argue whether the British fully grasped the subtleties of Tahitian social codes, or merely misinterpreted them through their own lens. You approach a group of women seated near a shallow tide pool. One tilts her head at a sailor presenting a rusty nail, her fingers brushing it lightly, as though weighing its unseen potential. A child nearby laughs softly, pointing at another sailor who fumbles with two nails, clearly unsure which to offer. The woman exchanges a brief glance with her companions, a subtle signal that passes unnoticed by most of the crew. You can almost feel the network of observation forming, delicate and invisible, guiding behavior with elegance and authority. Fringe accounts suggest these early interactions were designed as instructional games, teaching Europeans how to interpret nuance, patience, and social hierarchy. You wander along the beach, noting the fluidity of interactions. Sailors hand over nails and small metal objects. Tahitian women respond with fruit, shell ornaments, and woven mats. Every transaction carries multiple layers of meaning: the obvious exchange, the assessment of character, the performance of courtesy, and sometimes playful mischief. You notice one sailor proudly showing off a small carved shell he received, unaware that the real lesson, the subtle reading of gestures, has passed him by entirely. You feel a mix of amusement and admiration. This is diplomacy disguised as casual trade. Historians still debate whether such exchanges were interpreted correctly by the British or distorted in their logs. As the sun climbs higher, you notice recurring patterns. Children dart between adults, picking up nails, shells, and trinkets, observing reactions and learning social codes through mimicry. A woman hands a sailor a coconut cup in exchange for a nail, but not before exchanging a pointed glance with another elder. You realize that these glances, often overlooked in journals, carry information as potent as any written record. Fringe interpretations propose that such nuanced observation functioned as a means of teaching newcomers the subtleties of island social dynamics. You smile quietly, realizing how absurd and sophisticated this system is all at once. Walking closer to the forest edge, you note the careful observation exercised by the Tahitians. One woman watches sailors fumble with nails, nodding subtly, while another instructs a child on the timing of laughter and gesture. You recognize a rhythm: observation, assessment, correction, and reinforcement. The British may have viewed these moments as whimsical or trivial, yet you see them as deeply instructive. Historians still argue about the degree to which Tahitian women exerted agency in these exchanges, versus simply responding to British behavior. By mid-morning, the beach has transformed into a stage. Sailors present their nails with varying degrees of confidence. Women and children orchestrate subtle corrections and tests, guiding interactions with minimal overt instruction. You notice one sailor accidentally drops a nail, which a child quickly retrieves, handing it to a woman who smiles faintly. The entire sequence repeats like a gentle choreography, unnoticed by most, but profoundly shaping understanding, trust, and social awareness. Fringe accounts suggest these repetitions were intentional, designed to teach newcomers cultural rhythm and patience without a single spoken word. The sun climbs to its zenith, and the exchanges grow both faster and more complex. You watch a sailor try to offer 2 nails at once, only to be playfully corrected by a woman who taps him on the shoulder, subtly signaling timing, attention, and approach. You notice how each interaction layers upon the previous ones, creating a dense web of observation, learning, and subtle social negotiation. Historians still debate whether the British understood the cumulative lessons or simply recorded them as curiosities, unaware of the instructional depth embedded in these gestures. By mid-afternoon, you pause to observe the surrounding landscape, sparkling white sand, turquoise waters, and dense green foliage. The natural rhythm mirrors the social one. The waves rise and fall, coconuts sway, and human interactions follow an almost imperceptible pattern of observation, exchange, and subtle instruction. You notice one sailor presenting a nail with theatrical confidence, met with a deliberate pause and a quiet, instructive glance from a woman. Fringe interpretations propose that these interactions were less about the objects and more about teaching cultural literacy, patience, observation, and responsiveness. As the afternoon wanes, you recognize a pattern in the sailors' behavior. They begin adjusting gestures, observing reactions, and learning the subtleties of timing, positioning, and social nuance. Tahitian women continue guiding with minimal disruption, correcting without confrontation, observing without interference. You see how easily a simple object, a nail, becomes a pivot around which understanding, miscommunication, and social teaching rotate. Historians still debate whether the British fully grasped these dynamics or misread them entirely, though you sense the complexity in every exchanged glance. Twilight descends, casting long shadows and bathing the beach in soft golden light. You feel the day's rhythm slowing, waves lapping gently, and the exchanges tapering into quiet reflection. Sailors recount successes with laughter. Tahitian women respond with subtle gestures, reinforcing lessons learned in patience, attention, and observation. Fringe accounts suggest these twilight exchanges were critical in reinforcing understanding and cultural literacy, cementing the rhythm of social engagement into memory. You breathe in the rich, salt-laden air, feeling the subtle pulse of observation and teaching settle into the landscape and into you. Night falls, and the beach quiets, save for the rhythmic whisper of the surf and the rustling of palm fronds. You lie back, sand warm beneath you, reflecting on the day's lessons. The power of small gestures, the importance of attention, and the subtle instruction embedded in casual exchange. Every nail, every glance, every fleeting interaction has carried meaning far beyond its apparent simplicity. Historians still argue over the degree of agency and interpretation, but you feel it with certainty in the rhythm, subtlety, and quiet intelligence of the Tahitian women, whose presence shapes every moment of contact. You trudge along the sandy shore, the afternoon sun sinking low and casting long, golden streaks across the beach, painting the waves in molten light. You notice Captain Cook standing apart from the bustling exchanges, his hands clasped behind his back, gaze sweeping over the shoreline, the surf, and the mingling of British sailors and Tahitian women. There's a tension in his posture that you feel even before you see it in his furrowed brow, the awareness that maintaining discipline, authority, and diplomacy simultaneously is like balancing on a knife edge. You can hear the faint clink of nails in sailors' pockets, each one a reminder of minor victories and minor transgressions alike. Historians still argue whether Cook's frustration stemmed more from cultural misunderstanding or the inherent difficulty of maintaining order in such novel circumstances. A group of sailors approaches, whispering among themselves about trades that went well and trades that didn't. One proudly waves a small carved shell, clearly unaware of the subtle exchange it represents, less a gift than a test of his patience and understanding. You watch as Captain Cook signals discreetly, a slight tilt of the head or a hand raised ever so slightly, attempting to guide behavior without overtly interfering. The balance is delicate. Encourage interaction, but avoid chaos, assert authority, but respect the nuances of local customs. Fringe accounts suggest that Cook's attempts at mediation sometimes created confusion rather than clarity, as sailors interpreted signals inconsistently or ignored them altogether. You wander closer to observe a particularly tense moment. A sailor fumbles with a rusty nail, trying to offer it to a woman seated in the shade. She tilts her head, examining both him and the object with precision, and then, after a moment, offers a small woven mat in exchange, but with a pointed look at the captain. It's subtle, almost invisible to most, but you can sense the silent commentary, acknowledgement of authority, tempered by autonomy. Historians still debate how much power Tahitian women exerted in these early encounters versus the influence of naval command. Though you feel the interplay in the air, tangible as the ocean breeze brushing your neck. Walking further along the shoreline, you notice sailors increasingly anxious about pleasing both Cook and the Tahitian women. Each gesture becomes calculated, each trade observed not only by locals but also by fellow crew members. One sailor fumbles, dropping a nail in the sand, and the collective gaze of both sides fixes on him instantly. You sense the lesson without words. Every action carries consequences, immediate and subtle. Fringe interpretations even suggest that such moments of embarrassment or correction were deliberately orchestrated by locals to teach newcomers about attentiveness, humility, and social intelligence. You pause to observe Captain Cook more closely. He's scribbling in his journal, furiously recording interactions, object exchanges, and behavioral cues. The meticulousness of his note-taking reveals both his curiosity and anxiety, documentation as control, observation as strategy. Sailors glance at him for guidance, seeking reassurance. Yet they often misinterpret his signals, creating layers of misunderstanding and humor. You can't help but smile at the human comedy unfolding, aware that centuries later, historians will scrutinize these logs, attempting to reconstruct intent and meaning from fragmented observations. By mid-afternoon, the exchanges have intensified. Nails, shells, fruit, and woven mats pass from hand to hand in a delicate choreography. You notice Cook occasionally stepping between interactions, offering subtle corrections or gentle gestures of guidance. One sailor tries to trade 2 nails at once, clearly overconfident, and is quietly corrected with a nod and a soft word. The lesson is precise timing, patience, and perception are as important as the objects themselves. Historians still argue whether Cook's interventions helped or hindered understanding, though you feel the tension, subtle and continuous, like a low hum in the air. You stroll toward a group of Tahitian children, observing quietly from the edge of the trading circle. They laugh softly when a sailor clumsily drops a nail or mispronounces a word. Their laughter is not cruel, but instructional, a gentle reminder of the subtle rules being enacted. You realize that even these small observers play a role in shaping interactions. They teach, correct, and influence with minimal words. Fringe accounts suggest that the presence of children was a strategic element, guiding Europeans through observation and social mimicry without overt instruction. As the sun dips lower, you notice the changing shadows and temperature. Sailors and Tahitian women alike begin to adjust behavior according to light, heat, and fatigue. Captain Cook steps back to reassess, clearly weighing the balance of discipline against diplomacy. You feel the weight of his responsibility, the impossible task of keeping sailors in line while respecting the subtle agency of the locals. Historians still argue whether Cook's approach was exemplary leadership or a struggle against inevitable chaos. The golden hour stretches, and you see sailors practicing careful observation, adjusting posture, tone, and offering strategy. Tahitian women respond with deliberate but subtle guidance. A tilt of the head, a half smile, a small gesture with a shell. Every interaction layers upon the previous ones, creating a web of learning, adaptation, and social negotiation. You notice that humor remains central. Laughter softens lessons, attention sharpens them, and objects like nails mediate the exchange. Fringe interpretations suggest that these subtle corrections and observational games were instrumental in teaching Europeans cultural literacy, patience, and awareness. By twilight, the tension has eased slightly, though the lessons continue. You walk past a sailor recounting exaggerated trades, a woman observing silently, a child laughing at a misplaced nail. The interplay of authority, agency, humor, and observation is ongoing, a living laboratory of human interaction. You reflect on the complexity. What appears as minor missteps are actually critical steps in understanding, adaptation, and connection. Historians still debate how much of this was consciously managed versus instinctive social intelligence on the part of Tahitian participants. But you feel it clearly in every glance, gesture, and exchanged object. Night descends softly, the surf whispering against the shore, and the fires flicker gently, casting warm glows over the sand. Captain Cook closes his journal, his gaze lingering on the interactions he has overseen all day. Sailors are exhausted, aware of lessons learned, and still unlearned. You lie back in the sand, letting the hum of human activity, observation, and subtle instruction settle into your awareness. The balance of discipline and diplomacy, authority and autonomy, laughter and teaching. Cook's dilemma has played out before your eyes, shaping the texture of first contact in ways both visible and unseen. You trudge along the warm sand as morning light spills across the beach, illuminating the delicate interplay between ocean and shore. Each step sinks slightly, leaving fleeting impressions, reminders that your presence is temporary in this place that has existed long before you arrived. The sailors are stirring, pockets jingling with nails, pins, and other small bits of metal, the curious tools of negotiation and favor. You watch as they approach the Tahitian women with a mixture of eagerness and hesitation, aware that every exchange carries lessons they may not fully comprehend. Historians still argue whether British perception underestimated the strategic subtlety of these early encounters, or simply misunderstood the social codes in play. A group of women emerges from the foliage, carrying baskets of fruit, small woven mats, and shells glinting in the sun. One woman approaches a sailor offering a rusty nail, her eyes flicking briefly toward another woman, communicating silently. You observe the meticulous timing and precision in her movements, almost like a quiet choreography designed to teach observation and patience. She accepts the nail, handing the sailor a delicately carved shell in return, and his grin is almost blinding. Fringe interpretations suggest that these interactions served as implicit lessons in cultural literacy, teaching newcomers about hierarchy, timing, and subtle social negotiation. You wander along the shoreline, observing the ebb and flow of interactions. Sailors hand over their nails, shells, and bits of metal, while Tahitian women respond with gifts of fruit and ornaments. Each transaction is layered with multiple meanings: practicality, diplomacy, instruction, and subtle testing. One sailor, proud of having won a trade, glances at Captain Cook for validation, unaware that the true lesson has already been imparted in the woman's careful evaluation. Historians still debate whether the British fully recognized the significance of these exchanges or interpreted them through the limited lens of European notions of commerce and negotiation. By mid-morning, the rhythm of trade accelerates. Children dart among the adults, sometimes stealing a nail or shell, sometimes observing quietly. You notice the intentionality in these small acts. The children are learning as much as the sailors are, internalizing rules of attention, patience, and observation. You hand a nail to a small boy, who examines it with the precision of a craftsman, then passes it to a woman who nods faintly. Fringe accounts propose that these interactions were intentionally structured, providing subtle instruction in local customs without overt confrontation or instruction. Walking closer to the edge of the forest, you observe a pattern in the women's behavior. They monitor trades, adjust positioning, and whisper brief instructions to children, shaping interactions with finesse. You recognize a rhythm observation, subtle correction, and reinforcement. Sailors, meanwhile, adjust gestures and postures, learning to interpret visual cues rather than relying on verbal communication alone. Historians still argue how much agency the Tahitians exercised in guiding these early encounters versus the influence of British assumptions, though the evidence of subtle teaching is tangible in the repeated patterns you see. As the sun climbs higher, the exchanges grow more complex. One sailor attempts to trade 2 nails at once, an act of overconfidence. A woman gently taps him on the shoulder, redirecting the trade with a small, instructive gesture. You notice how quickly lessons are absorbed and repeated, forming a web of knowledge that extends beyond individual participants. Fringe interpretations suggest these playful corrections were part of a deliberate system of social education, embedding cultural literacy in ordinary transactions. You step back and take in the broader scene. The sand stretches white and warm, waves lapping rhythmically, and the foliage rustling gently behind. Sailors are becoming increasingly attentive, adjusting their techniques, watching for signs of approval or correction. You see how a single object, a nail, functions as a pivot, mediating instruction, observation, and human connection. Historians still debate whether the British comprehended these nuances or merely recorded them as curiosities. But the layers of meaning are evident in every glance, gesture, and exchanged object. By mid-afternoon, the beach hums with activity. Exchanges continue seamlessly, laughter punctuating instruction, subtle corrections weaving patterns of learning and social awareness. You notice how Tahitian women guide interactions with minimal effort, a tilt of the head, a shift of weight, a fleeting smile. Sailors, increasingly aware, respond, adapt, and sometimes misstep, continuing the cycle of observation and correction. Fringe accounts argue that these moments were foundational in teaching European visitors patience, attentiveness, and subtle social negotiation. As the sun tilts westward, casting long shadows, the rhythm of interaction slows. Sailors recount trades with pride, some exaggerating successes, others quietly acknowledging lessons learned. Children and women continue to observe, passing small signals and gestures of guidance, shaping understanding without words. You realize that what appears casual is actually a highly orchestrated network of instruction and adaptation, forming a living curriculum of social awareness. Historians still debate whether the British fully recognized these lessons, though the evidence of consistent patterning and deliberate observation is clear. Twilight descends, and you watch the beach, bathed in warm, golden light. Waves lap gently, fires flicker along the shore, and a quiet sense of reflection settles over the participants. Sailors and Tahitians alike pause, catching their breath and reviewing the day's interactions. You feel the rhythm of learning, observation, and subtle instruction vibrating through the sand, wind, and water, a hum of human connection Fringe interpretations suggest that these evenings were critical in consolidating understanding, reinforcing lessons in attention, patience, and cultural nuance. Night falls, soft and serene, leaving the air fragrant with salt and flowers. You lie back in the sand, absorbing the quiet pulse of the island, the subtle lessons embedded in smiles, glances, and objects exchanged. The rhythm of day-to-day social negotiation, the careful choreography of authority, autonomy, and observation, lingers in your mind. Historians still argue about the depth and impact of these early interactions, but you feel it with certainty. The dance of nails, gestures, and laughter has begun weaving the fabric of history, quietly and profoundly. You trudge along the sunlit beach, sand clinging to your damp feet, noticing how the world seems suspended between heat, salt, and the faint floral scent of Tahitian flora. The sailors are bustling once again, nails and pins jangling in pockets as they prepare for another round of exchanges. You feel the tension in the air, the delicate balance of curiosity, anticipation, and social navigation that defines these early encounters. Every glance, every hesitation, carries weight. Historians still argue whether the British fully appreciated the complexity of Tahitian social codes, or viewed interactions through their own narrow notions of commerce and hierarchy. You approach a group of women seated near a tide pool, their hands deftly weaving mats or arranging fruit. One woman studies a sailor presenting a rusty nail, holding it lightly, tilting her head as she weighs its worth, not just materially, but socially. Nearby, a child observes carefully, whispering and gesturing, guiding the adult in subtle ways. You notice the unspoken choreography: observation, assessment, subtle correction, and response. Fringe interpretations suggest these exchanges were intentionally instructional, teaching newcomers patience, awareness, and the nuances of social interaction without a single spoken word. As you wander along the shoreline, sailors present their nails with varying degrees of confidence. Some are timid, hesitant, and fumbling. Others try to assert dominance with theatrical gestures. Tahitian women respond with calm precision, correcting missteps with slight nods, gentle taps, or soft laughter. You realize that what seems like casual trade is a multi-layered negotiation involving attention, hierarchy, and subtle influence. Historians still debate whether the British ever grasped the instructional depth of these exchanges, or simply recorded them as quaint curiosities. By mid-morning, the rhythm of interaction has intensified. Children weave through the crowd, sometimes collecting nails, sometimes observing closely. Their laughter punctuates the air, soft yet deliberate, reinforcing the learning environment. You notice one sailor carefully offering a nail, which is received and evaluated with precision. The subtle feedback, an approving smile or a slight hesitation, teaches as much as the exchange itself. Fringe accounts propose that these interactions were designed to train Europeans in cultural literacy, using objects and gestures as teaching tools. Moving closer to the forest, you observe Tahitian women monitoring the interactions. Their movements are minimal yet precise, adjusting a child's position, signaling a subtle pause, or directing attention to a particular gesture. Sailors attempt to read these cues, often misinterpreting them, yet gradually adapting. You notice the repetition of lessons as the same misstep occurs, followed by corrective gestures and laughter, layering learning over time. Historians still argue how consciously the Tahitians directed this instruction, though the impact on the newcomers is visible. As the sun reaches its zenith, exchanges grow more intricate. One sailor attempts to trade 2 nails simultaneously, an act that is gently corrected by a woman with a quiet, instructive tap. You observe how quickly sailors adjust, internalizing lessons on timing, focus, and observation. Fringe interpretations suggest that these corrections were an intentional system for instilling cultural awareness, patience, and perceptiveness in Europeans. The beach becomes a living classroom, with waves as a metronome and laughter as punctuation. By mid-afternoon, the interplay has reached a sophisticated rhythm. Sailors offer nails, shells, and small metal bits. Tahitian women respond with fruit, ornaments, and subtle guidance. Every object exchanged carries layered meaning, value, assessment, humor, and instruction. You notice one sailor misinterpreting a gesture, resulting in a quiet, corrective nudge, a gentle lesson delivered without conflict. Historians still debate whether British misinterpretation was common, but the orchestration of these lessons is evident in every repeated pattern. You step back and take in the broader scene: sparkling sand, turquoise waters, rustling palms, and the rhythmic motion of trade and observation. You notice the elegance with which Tahitians manage these interactions, teaching, testing, and guiding, all while preserving humor and agency. Sailors gradually recognize patterns, learning to anticipate gestures and responses, though missteps are inevitable. Fringe accounts suggest that even minor errors were meaningful, interpreted as lessons in patience, attentiveness, and social intelligence. As the afternoon wanes, the exchanges begin to slow. Sailors recount their trades with pride, exaggerating successes or downplaying mistakes, while children and women continue to guide subtly through glances, gestures, and laughter. You begin to appreciate the depth of these interactions. The interplay of observation, correction, and adaptation creates a rich social tapestry that is invisible to casual observers, but critical to understanding the dynamics at play. Historians still debate whether the British fully absorbed these lessons, though the evidence of subtle teaching is clear. Twilight casts long shadows across the beach. The warmth of the day lingers in the sand, and the gentle roar of the surf provides a constant, hypnotic rhythm. Sailors and Tahitians alike begin pausing, catching their breath after hours of careful observation, negotiation, and subtle instruction. You notice the calm efficiency with which women and children consolidate the day's lessons, reinforcing understanding and establishing unspoken social codes. Fringe interpretations suggest that these evening moments were essential for consolidating learning and cultural literacy among newcomers. Night settles gently over the beach, the surf whispering against the shore, fires casting flickering light across the sand. You lie back, letting the day's subtle lessons, minor triumphs, and repeated corrections wash over you. The rhythm of instruction, observation, and adaptation, the quiet interplay of humor, patience, and subtle authority, lingers in your mind. Historians still argue about the implications of these early encounters, but you feel it with certainty in every glance, gesture, and exchanged object. The dance of nails, observation, and laughter is shaping the texture of history in ways both profound and intimate. You trudge along the glimmering sand as the sun edges higher, casting a pale, warm light across the shoreline, revealing the faint, intricate footprints of both human and animal travelers from earlier in the day. Each step sinks softly into the grains, reminding you of your transitory place in a world that has its own rhythm, long before and long after you arrived. Sailors shuffle with nervous energy, pockets jingling with nails, pins, and small metal trinkets, the tools of their peculiar trade. You notice the contrast between their eager movements and the calm, deliberate motions of Tahitian women, who guide, observe, and orchestrate without appearing to intervene. Historians still argue whether the British recognized the full sophistication of these social codes, or simply interpreted them through the narrow lens of European commerce. A group of women approaches, baskets swaying with fruit and woven mats. One of them studies a sailor's nail with precision, weighing not its material value but its social implications. Nearby, a child observes carefully, whispering to another as if instructing the adult in subtle ways. You catch the almost invisible choreography, unfolding observation, assessment, subtle correction, and response. Fringe interpretations suggest these encounters functioned as lessons, teaching patience, attentiveness, and social nuance without verbal instruction, a silent curriculum in human interaction. As you wander down the shoreline, sailors attempt exchanges with varying success. One presents a rusty nail with theatrical flourish, hoping for recognition, while the woman examines it carefully, tilting her head and assessing his temperament. You notice the subtle signals, an approving nod, a playful tap, a shared glance with a child. Every act carries layered meaning, from humor to evaluation to instruction. Historians still debate whether British sailors truly grasped these nuances or merely documented them as quaint observations. By mid-morning, the rhythm accelerates. Children dart among adults, sometimes collecting nails or shells, sometimes observing quietly. You notice the intentionality in their laughter, gestures, and movements. They are participants and teachers simultaneously, reinforcing norms and expectations. One sailor carefully offers a nail, which is received with measured attention. Fringe accounts suggest that these interactions were deliberately instructional, creating a system of social literacy without needing spoken words. Approaching the forest edge, you notice Tahitian women subtly guiding the flow of exchanges. They whisper brief instructions to children, adjust gestures, and redirect attention with minimal effort. Sailors attempt to follow, fumbling at first, then gradually adapting. Patterns repeat, lessons accumulate, and humor softens correction. Historians still debate the level of conscious orchestration by Tahitians, though the impact on Europeans is clear. Patience, attention, and awareness are being taught through simple, repeated interactions. As the sun climbs, exchanges grow increasingly intricate. One sailor attempts to offer multiple nails at once, only to be gently corrected with a playful nudge. You notice how quickly sailors internalize these lessons, adjusting gestures, timing, and expressions. Fringe interpretations suggest that these subtle corrections were part of a deliberate system of instruction, teaching newcomers cultural literacy, observation, and patience. By mid-afternoon, the interplay is sophisticated. Nails, shells, and trinkets pass in a rhythm of observation, humor, and subtle instruction. Every gesture carries multiple layers of meaning, exchange, evaluation, teaching, and entertainment. You observe a sailor misinterpreting a cue, corrected with a quiet glance or gentle touch, reinforcing the social code without words. Historians still argue whether the British truly understood these subtleties or misrecorded them in their logs, yet the patterns of instruction are evident. You step back, taking in the landscape, turquoise water, white sand, rustling palms, and the fluid rhythm of human interaction. You notice the elegance of the women's orchestration. They manage, correct, and teach with subtlety, preserving humor and autonomy. Sailors gradually recognize patterns, learning to anticipate responses. Though mistakes are inevitable, fringe accounts propose that even these minor errors were instructive, embedding lessons in observation, timing, and patience. As afternoon wanes, exchanges slow. Sailors recount trades with pride, exaggerating victories or quietly acknowledging minor failures, while children and women continue subtle guidance through glances and gestures. You begin to appreciate the depth. Casual transactions are part of a sophisticated, living curriculum of social learning. Historians still debate how much of these lessons the British absorbed, though the instructional rhythm is undeniable. Twilight stretches across the beach, softening the light and casting long shadows. You notice the way the participants pause, reflect, and consolidate learning, reinforcing subtle social norms. Sailors rest, women observe quietly, and children giggle softly, their small interventions reinforcing the structure of interaction. Fringe interpretations suggest that these moments were essential for consolidating understanding and cultural literacy. Night falls gently, waves whispering along the shore, fires flickering, and a calm settling over the sand. You lie back, letting the subtle lessons, minor triumphs, and repeated corrections of the day wash over you. Observation, adaptation, humor, patience, and subtle authority have shaped the rhythm of interaction, leaving an indelible mark on participants. Historians still argue over the implications, but you feel it. The dance of nails, glances, and laughter is quietly shaping history in ways both profound and intimate. You trudge along the soft, sun-warmed sand as the morning light slowly brightens the beach, each grain sticking to the damp soles of your feet. The rhythmic crash of waves keeps time with the subtle tension in the air, the delicate balance of curiosity, negotiation, and silent instruction that defines these early encounters. Sailors shuffle forward, nails and pins jangling in their pockets like anxious talismans, each one a tool in the complex interplay of exchange. You notice how the Tahitian women move with calm precision, their gestures deliberate yet infused with an effortless grace. Historians still argue whether the British grasped the sophistication of these exchanges or simply recorded them through their European notions of trade and hierarchy. A group of women approaches, carrying woven mats, baskets of fruit, and shells glinting in the sunlight. One stops, eyes focused on a sailor holding a nail, weighing not its material value, but its symbolic and social implications. A child nearby whispers and gestures, subtly guiding the woman's response. You notice the invisible choreography: observation, assessment, correction, and reinforcement, all performed seamlessly. Fringe interpretations suggest that these interactions functioned as lessons, teaching Europeans attention, patience, and cultural literacy without a single spoken word. As you walk further along the beach, sailors attempt to offer their nails with varying degrees of success. One holds his hands out with theatrical flourish, hoping to impress, while the woman inspects it with calm precision, tilting her head and gauging his temperament. You notice subtle signals: a nod, a playful tap, a glance exchanged with a child, each one a miniature lesson in observation and adaptability. Historians still debate whether the British fully understood these cues or misinterpreted them as quaint or whimsical behavior. By mid-morning, the exchanges intensify. Children weave through adults, sometimes retrieving nails or shells, sometimes simply observing. You notice how their laughter and small interventions guide both adults and sailors, reinforcing rules and social norms. One sailor carefully presents a nail, and the woman's measured response conveys subtle feedback, teaching as much as the trade itself. Fringe accounts propose that these moments were intentionally structured to instill lessons in patience, observation, and the intricacies of social negotiation. Approaching the forest line, you see Tahitian women subtly orchestrating the flow of exchanges. They whisper instructions to children, adjust gestures, and redirect attention with minimal effort. Sailors fumble at first, then gradually adapt, repeating behaviors that have been subtly corrected. Patterns emerge, humor softens instruction, and the rhythm of the beach becomes a living classroom. Historians still argue how deliberate these teaching moments were, though the effectiveness is visible in repeated behavioral adjustments among the crew. As the sun reaches its zenith, exchanges become more complex. One sailor offers 2 nails at once, overconfidently, only to be corrected with a gentle, instructive nudge. You notice the speed with which lessons are internalized, gestures refined, and interactions adapted. Fringe interpretations suggest that these playful corrections were part of an intentional system to teach Europeans cultural literacy, observation, and adaptability. The beach becomes a space where humor, instruction, and subtle negotiation converge seamlessly. By mid-afternoon, the interplay is sophisticated. Objects, nails, shells, fruit, pass in a rhythm of observation, evaluation, and subtle teaching. You see sailors misinterpreting cues, corrected quietly, and gradually adapting. Every exchange carries layered meaning: material, social, and instructional. Historians still debate whether the British fully recognized these patterns or misrecorded them, though the repeated choreography indicates intentional teaching by the Tahitians. You step back, taking in the scene: turquoise waters, bright sand, swaying palms, and human interactions flowing with grace and subtlety. Tahitian women manage, correct, and guide effortlessly, preserving humor, agency, and instruction. Sailors increasingly recognize patterns, adjust their approach, and internalize subtle lessons. Fringe accounts propose that even minor errors were leveraged as opportunities for teaching observation, patience, and adaptability. As afternoon wanes, the pace slows. Sailors recount trades with pride, exaggerating wins or quietly acknowledging mistakes, while children and women continue subtle guidance through glances and gestures. You begin to appreciate the depth. Casual trades are part of a sophisticated curriculum of social learning, invisible yet impactful. Historians still debate how much of this was consciously perceived by the British, though the instructional rhythm is undeniable. Twilight stretches across the beach, softening light and casting long, golden shadows. You notice participants pausing, reflecting, and consolidating learning. Sailors rest, women observe, children giggle softly, reinforcing lessons through subtle interaction. Fringe interpretations suggest that these evening moments were crucial in consolidating understanding, cultural literacy, and patience. Night falls, waves whisper along the shore, fires flicker on the sand, and a calm settles over the beach. You lie back, absorbing the lessons, subtle corrections, and repeated gestures of the day. Observation, humor, patience, and subtle authority have shaped the rhythm of interaction. Historians still argue over the implications, but you feel it clearly: the dance of nails, glances, and laughter is quietly shaping history, intimately and profoundly. You trudge along the sun-warmed sand, the gentle rhythm of the surf a constant backdrop to the subtle human choreography unfolding around you. The morning light glints off shells, woven mats, and the small metal trinkets clutched nervously in sailors' hands. Nails, pins, and fragments of iron have become more than objects. They are instruments of learning, play, and negotiation, tools that shape the very rhythm of this beach. You notice the sailors' hesitancy. Each step, each offer, is measured against the silent scrutiny of Tahitian women. Historians still argue whether British observers fully appreciated the layers of meaning behind these exchanges or imposed their own frameworks of value and hierarchy. A group of women emerges from the fringe of the forest, moving with elegant precision. One stops to examine a sailor's nail, tilting her head as if considering both the object and the offerer. A child crouches nearby, whispering and gesturing subtly, guiding the adult in her response. You recognize the choreography: observation, evaluation, correction, reinforcement. Fringe accounts suggest these exchanges were deliberately structured to teach newcomers patience, attentiveness, and cultural literacy without a single spoken word. As you wander along the shore, sailors offer nails with varying degrees of confidence. Some are hesitant and awkward, fumbling in nervous excitement. Others display theatrical flourish, hoping to impress. The woman receiving a nail tilts her head, assessing temperament and attentiveness rather than simply accepting the object. You notice the layers of communication: approving nods, playful taps, subtle glances, all carrying instruction embedded in humor and observation. Historians still debate whether the British comprehended these cues or reduced them to quaint notes in their logs. By mid-morning, the rhythm quickens. Children weave between adults, sometimes collecting nails, sometimes observing quietly, reinforcing the social rules. One sailor presents a nail with meticulous care, receiving measured feedback in return. You realize the lesson is as much about perception and responsiveness as it is about the physical trade. Fringe interpretations proposed these interactions functioned as a non-verbal curriculum in cultural awareness and social intelligence. You approach the forest's edge and observe Tahitian women subtly managing the flow. Gestures, whispered instructions, and gentle corrections guide both children and sailors, shaping behavior without overt enforcement. Sailors misstep at first, but gradually adapt, internalizing lessons through repeated observation and playful correction. Historians still argue how deliberate these interventions were, though their cumulative effect on European visitors is clear. Attentiveness, patience, and subtle social acumen are being imparted through everyday transactions. As the sun climbs toward its zenith, exchanges become more intricate. A sailor attempts to offer multiple nails at once, overconfidently, only to receive a gentle nudge or playful correction. You notice how quickly these lessons are absorbed, gestures refined, and behavior adapted. Fringe accounts suggest that these small, deliberate corrections were part of an educational system, cultivating observation, timing, and social literacy among the Europeans. The beach hums with this silent instruction, punctuated by laughter and playful interactions. By mid-afternoon, the rhythm has evolved into a complex pattern. Nails, shells, woven mats, and fruit pass among hands with subtle guidance embedded in every movement. Sailors misinterpret cues, are corrected gently, and learn, layering lessons into their understanding of local norms. Historians continue to debate whether British visitors truly understood these lessons or misrecorded them as trivial curiosities. But the choreography of instruction is unmistakable. You step back and take in the scene: turquoise water, soft sand, swaying palms, and human interaction flowing with a deliberate, gentle rhythm. Tahitian women orchestrate, correct, and teach with elegance, preserving humor and agency. Sailors gradually recognize patterns, adjust their approach, and internalize the subtle lessons of attention and patience. Fringe accounts suggest that even minor mistakes were leveraged as opportunities to teach observation, cultural awareness, and social intelligence. As afternoon wanes, exchanges slow. Sailors recount trades with pride, some exaggerating victories, others quietly acknowledging errors. Children and women continue to guide subtly, reinforcing learning without words. You recognize the sophistication in these casual interactions. What seems trivial is in fact a rich, ongoing curriculum of observation, adaptation, and cultural instruction. Historians still debate the degree of British comprehension, though the subtle lessons are visible in repeated gestures and corrections. Twilight stretches across the beach, softening shadows and bathing everything in gold. You notice the participants pausing, consolidating the day's lessons, and reflecting quietly. Sailors rest, women observe with gentle attention, children giggle softly, embedding learning through observation, humor, and repetition. Fringe interpretations suggest that these twilight moments were essential for reinforcing understanding, patience, and cultural literacy. Night descends softly, surf whispering against the shore, fires flickering along the sand. You lie back, letting the day's subtle instructions, minor triumphs, and playful corrections settle into your awareness. Observation, patience, humor, and subtle authority have orchestrated a rhythm of human learning. Historians continue to debate the implications, but you feel it intuitively. The interplay of nails, glances, and laughter quietly shapes history, profoundly and intimately. You trudge along the glistening sand as morning sunlight spills over the horizon, illuminating the delicate interplay of humans and nature along the shoreline. Waves lap gently at your feet, their rhythm echoing the subtle pulse of social negotiation playing out before you. Sailors, nails clinking in their pockets, shuffle toward the Tahitian women, unsure yet eager, aware that each interaction carries lessons far beyond mere trade. You notice the contrast between their hurried movements and the calm, measured gestures of the women, who orchestrate observation, correction, and subtle guidance with effortless grace. Historians still argue whether British observers fully comprehended the sophistication of these exchanges or imposed their own limited notions of commerce and hierarchy. A group of women emerges from the tree line, their baskets filled with fruit, shells, and intricately woven mats. One woman examines a sailor's nail carefully, tilting her head in assessment, while a child nearby whispers subtle directions. You perceive the choreography: silent evaluation, instruction, correction, and reinforcement, all woven seamlessly into the moment. Fringe interpretations suggest these encounters functioned as informal lessons, cultivating patience, attentiveness, and cultural literacy without spoken instruction. As you wander along the beach, sailors offer their nails with varying degrees of confidence. Some are hesitant, others attempt grand gestures, hoping to impress. The woman receiving a nail evaluates both the object and the offerer, using subtle signals. A tilt of the head, a small smile, a glance exchanged with a child. Each signal carries instruction wrapped in humor, observation, and guidance. Historians still debate whether the British truly understood these cues or merely recorded them as quaint curiosities. By mid-morning, the rhythm intensifies. Children weave between adults, sometimes collecting nails, sometimes observing quietly, their laughter reinforcing social norms. One sailor presents a nail with meticulous care, met with a measured response that conveys subtle instruction. You notice how each moment is as much about perception and responsiveness as it is about physical exchange. Fringe accounts propose that these interactions functioned as a silent curriculum, teaching newcomers cultural literacy, patience, and social intelligence. Approaching the forest edge, you observe Tahitian women orchestrating the flow of trade with minimal intervention. Gestures, whispered guidance, and small corrections shape both children and sailors, teaching subtly yet effectively. Sailors misstep at first, but gradually adapt, internalizing lessons through repeated observation. Historians still debate the degree of conscious orchestration, though the cumulative effect on British behavior is clear: attentiveness, patience, and subtle social acumen are learned without a word being spoken. As the sun rises higher, exchanges grow more intricate. One sailor attempts to trade 2 nails simultaneously, corrected gently with a playful nudge. You notice how quickly such lessons are absorbed, gestures refined, and behavior adapted. Fringe interpretations suggest these small corrections were part of an intentional teaching system, cultivating observation, timing, and cultural literacy. The beach becomes a living classroom, humor and instruction interwoven seamlessly. By mid-afternoon, the exchanges form a sophisticated pattern. Objects, nails, shells, mats, and fruit circulate in a rhythm of observation, evaluation, and subtle guidance. Sailors misinterpret cues, are corrected quietly, and gradually internalize the social rules. Historians still argue whether the British understood these patterns or misrecorded them, but the orchestration of instruction is evident. You step back and absorb the scene: turquoise waters, soft sand, swaying palms, and the smooth rhythm of human interaction. Tahitian women guide, correct, and teach with elegance, preserving humor and agency. Sailors recognize patterns, adjust their approach, and gradually internalize subtle lessons of observation, timing, and patience. Fringe accounts suggest that minor mistakes were leveraged as teaching moments, reinforcing cultural literacy and attentiveness. As afternoon wanes, exchanges slow. Sailors recount trades with pride, exaggerating victories, quietly acknowledging missteps. Children and women continue subtle guidance through gestures, consolidating learning without explicit instruction. You begin to appreciate the depth. Casual trade functions as a sophisticated, ongoing curriculum of observation, adaptation, and social instruction. Historians still debate how much the British truly absorbed, though the instructional rhythm is visible in repeated gestures and corrections. Twilight casts golden light across the sand, softening shadows and highlighting the fluidity of interaction. Participants pause, consolidate the day's lessons, and reflect quietly. Sailors rest, women observe gently, children giggle softly, embedding learning through observation, humor, and repetition. Fringe interpretations suggest these evening moments were crucial for reinforcing understanding, patience, and cultural nuance. Night settles softly over the beach. The surf whispers against the sand, fires flicker along the shore, and a calm pervades the scene. You lie back, absorbing the lessons, subtle corrections, and repeated interactions of the day. Observation, humor, patience, and subtle authority have orchestrated a rhythm of learning and connection. Historians continue to debate implications, but you feel it, the interplay of nails, glances, and laughter quietly shapes history, profoundly and intimately. You trudge along the soft, sunlit sand, feeling the warmth of the grains underfoot and the gentle pull of the tide as it laps around your ankles. The rhythm of the ocean mirrors the quiet pulse of human activity along the shoreline, a careful choreography of exchange, observation, and subtle instruction. Sailors shuffle nervously, nails clinking in their pockets, unsure of how their actions will be interpreted, while Tahitian women move with deliberate grace, guiding, correcting, and teaching without a single word. Historians still argue whether the British fully recognized the depth of these interactions or simply imposed their own frameworks of value, authority, and social hierarchy. A group of women approaches, their baskets laden with fruit, shells, and woven mats. One pauses to examine a sailor's nail, tilting her head slightly, her eyes calculating, while a child nearby whispers softly and gestures, subtly guiding the adult's response. You notice the intricate choreography at play: evaluation, correction, reinforcement, all conveyed silently. Fringe accounts suggest these exchanges served as informal lessons in patience, attentiveness, and cultural literacy, a kind of invisible curriculum for the Europeans. As you wander further along the beach, sailors offer nails with varying degrees of confidence. Some are timid, their movements hesitant, others are flamboyant, hoping to impress. The woman receiving the nail studies both object and offerer, giving subtle feedback. A nod, a smile, a glance, that conveys instruction without overt confrontation. Historians still debate whether the British grasped these cues or simply documented them as charming curiosities. By mid-morning, the rhythm intensifies. Children weave among adults, collecting nails, observing, and reinforcing social norms. You watch a sailor carefully present a nail, and the woman's measured response conveys subtle lessons in attentiveness and social perception. Fringe interpretations propose that these encounters functioned as an educational system, teaching cultural literacy and social intelligence without spoken words. Approaching the forest edge, you notice women guiding the flow of interactions with minimal gestures. Subtle nudges, whispered instructions, and quiet corrections shape both children and sailors. Missteps are corrected gently, and lessons are absorbed gradually through repetition. Historians still debate the intentionality behind these orchestrations, though the evidence of cumulative learning is unmistakable. Patience, observation, and subtle social skill are being imparted. As the sun climbs higher, exchanges grow more complex. One sailor offers 2 nails at once, overconfident, only to be met with a playful nudge and a slight correction. You see how quickly such lessons are internalized, behavior adjusted, and interactions refined. Fringe accounts suggest these corrections were part of a deliberate system to teach newcomers about timing, attention, and cultural nuance. By mid-afternoon, the pattern of exchanges has reached a sophisticated rhythm. Nails, shells, woven mats, and fruit pass seamlessly among hands, carrying layers of material, social, and instructional meaning. Sailors misinterpret signals, are corrected subtly, and gradually adapt. Historians still argue whether the British fully recognized these lessons or misrecorded them. But the choreography of guidance and observation is unmistakable. You pause to take in the scene: turquoise waters, soft sand, swaying palms, and the flowing interactions of humans engaged in a subtle social dance. Tahitian women guide, correct, and teach with elegance, humor, and authority. Sailors begin to notice patterns, adjust gestures, and internalize lessons about observation, patience, and social awareness. Fringe interpretations suggest even minor errors are leveraged as teaching opportunities, embedding cultural literacy in everyday exchange. As afternoon wanes, activity slows. Sailors recount trades with pride, exaggerating successes or quietly acknowledging missteps, while children and women continue subtle guidance, reinforcing learning without overt instruction. You begin to appreciate the depth. These casual interactions constitute a sophisticated curriculum of social learning. Historians still debate the degree of comprehension achieved by the British, though the patterns of subtle instruction are clearly visible. Twilight softens the landscape, casting golden shadows and emphasizing the gentle rhythms of interaction. Participants pause, reflect, and consolidate lessons. Sailors rest, women observe, and children giggle softly, reinforcing learning through observation and repetition. Fringe interpretations suggest these moments are essential for consolidating understanding, patience, and cultural literacy. Night descends, fires flicker across the sand, and the surf whispers in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. You lie back, absorbing the day's subtle instructions, minor triumphs, and repeated corrections. Observation, patience, humor, and authority have orchestrated a continuous rhythm of learning and connection. Historians continue to debate the implications, but you feel it clearly. Nails, glances, and laughter quietly shape history in ways both intimate and profound. You trudge along the soft, sunlit sand, feeling the warmth of the grains underfoot and the gentle pull of the tide as it laps around your ankles. The rhythm of the ocean mirrors the quiet pulse of human activity along the shoreline. A careful choreography of exchange, observation, and subtle instruction. Sailors shuffle nervously, nails clinking in their pockets, unsure of how their actions will be interpreted, while Tahitian women move with deliberate grace, guiding, correcting, and teaching without a single word. Historians still argue whether the British fully recognized the depth of these interactions or simply imposed their own frameworks of value, authority, and social hierarchy. A group of women approaches, their baskets laden with fruit shells and woven mats. One pauses to examine a sailor's nail, tilting her head slightly, her eyes calculating, while a child nearby whispers softly and gestures, subtly guiding the adult's response. You notice the intricate choreography at play: evaluation, correction, reinforcement, all conveyed silently. Fringe accounts suggest these exchanges served as informal lessons in patience, attentiveness, and cultural literacy, a kind of invisible curriculum for the Europeans. As you wander further along the beach, sailors offer nails with varying degrees of confidence. Some are timid, their movements hesitant, others are flamboyant, hoping to impress. The woman receiving the nail studies both object and offerer, giving subtle feedback. A nod, a smile, a glance, that conveys instruction without overt confrontation. Historians still debate whether the British grasped these cues or simply documented them as charming curiosities. By mid-morning, the rhythm intensifies. Children weave among adults, collecting nails, observing and reinforcing social norms. You watch a sailor carefully present a nail, and the woman's measured response conveys subtle lessons in attentiveness and social perception. Fringe interpretations propose that these encounters functioned as an educational system, teaching cultural literacy and social intelligence without spoken words. Approaching the forest edge, you notice women guiding the flow of interactions with minimal gestures. Subtle nudges, whispered instructions, and quiet corrections shape both children and sailors. Missteps are corrected gently, and lessons are absorbed gradually through repetition. Historians still debate the intentionality behind these orchestrations, though the evidence of cumulative learning is unmistakable. Patience, observation, and subtle social skill are being imparted. As the sun climbs higher, exchanges grow more complex. One sailor offers 2 nails at once, overconfident, only to be met with a playful nudge and a slight correction. You see how quickly such lessons are internalized, behavior adjusted, and interactions refined. Fringe accounts suggest these corrections were part of a deliberate system to teach newcomers about timing, attention, and cultural nuance. By mid-afternoon, the pattern of exchanges has reached a sophisticated rhythm. Nails, shells, woven mats, and fruit pass seamlessly among hands, carrying layers of material, social, and instructional meaning. Sailors misinterpret signals, are corrected subtly, and gradually adapt. Historians still argue whether the British fully recognized these lessons or misrecorded them. But the choreography of guidance and observation is unmistakable. You pause to take in the scene: turquoise waters, soft sand, swaying palms, and the flowing interactions of humans engaged in a subtle social dance. Tahitian women guide, correct, and teach with elegance, humor, and authority. Sailors begin to notice patterns, adjust gestures, and internalize lessons about observation, patience, and social awareness. Fringe interpretations suggest even minor errors are leveraged as teaching opportunities, embedding cultural literacy in everyday exchange. As afternoon wanes, activity slows. Sailors recount trades with pride, exaggerating successes or quietly acknowledging missteps, while children and women continue subtle guidance, reinforcing learning without overt instruction. You begin to appreciate the depth. These casual interactions constitute a sophisticated curriculum of social learning. Historians still debate the degree of comprehension achieved by the British, though the patterns of subtle instruction are clearly visible. Twilight softens the landscape, casting golden shadows and emphasizing the gentle rhythms of interaction. Participants pause, reflect, and consolidate lessons. Sailors rest, women observe, and children giggle softly, reinforcing learning through observation and repetition. Fringe interpretations suggest these moments are essential for consolidating understanding, patience, and cultural literacy. Night descends. Fires flicker across the sand, and the surf whispers in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. You lie back, absorbing the day's subtle instructions, minor triumphs, and repeated corrections. Observation, patience, humor, and authority have orchestrated a continuous rhythm of learning and connection. Historians continue to debate the implications, but you feel it clearly. Nails, glances, and laughter quietly shape history in ways both intimate and profound.